This is a little video about what you do when your car won't start. You know the battery's good, but when you try to start it, it doesn't do anything at all. So it's good if you can get the exact wiring diagram for your car, but most of the cars I've seen lately have these very basic components. The starting circuit is about the same on every car. The only thing that's different is, depending on the transmission type, you may have a different, say, the park neutral switch. If you have a manual transmission, it's a clutch switch where you have to push the clutch in or the car won't start. Or sometimes if you have a automatic transmission, the car has to be in park or neutral. And in some cars you also have to step on the brake switch. And I noticed in this car, which is a 2011 Fiesta, on the diagram it also shows that this signal, which is just a ground signal that turns on the relay, the start relay, is actually comes from the PCM, the computer for the engine, which is strange. I would have thought it might come from the body control module. But if there are a number of different things and logic involved in whether or not the car is allowed to start, that it's safe to start, that computational effort may be done in one of the computer modules, and then if everything's ready to start, then you get this negative signal to the relay. Of course, at the same time, you have to get the ignition switch turned to the start position, right? You don't want the starter motor to turn unless you're trying to start the car. So, and what I like to do is, since all the wires seem to go to this relay, I like to find this relay and actually interrogate the relay. We'll talk more about that after I just explain the rest of the circuitry. So you've got the battery here, and I'm assuming the terminals are clean. You've already checked that. You can put that off if you want, as long as you're pretty sure you have a good connection there. There's a big wire. It's usually red, but occasionally it's black. Big thick wire that goes to the solenoid, which is usually attached to the starter. And with the solenoid, and both of these are attached to ground because the starter is bolted to the transmission or the engine, and the engine is grounded over here. The whole engine, everything on the car mostly is grounded by various big wires. The solenoid, its job is to actually make the connection of the big wire to the starter, and it also sometimes engages the gear of the starter to the big gear on the engine that actually turns the engine to start. And the solenoid has another wire which comes from the relay, that's called the start wire, and that's a wire that's hot when everything is right, when you're turning the ignition switch on and you've got the car in neutral, or you're pressing on the clutch pedal in the case of a manual, and this fuse, the start fuse is not burned, and it's got power to the relay. The relay is going to click when it gets this signal here and this signal here. It clicks and it connects this power to this start wire, and then this start wire connects the solenoid, and so this big wire ends up getting connected inside the solenoid to this plus side of the starter, and the starter's already grounded, so now the starter should turn. That's everything there is to the circuit. This can be kind of complicated. Like I said, sometimes this is done inside one of the computer modules. So you will need a voltmeter to run these tests, or a multimeter. Actually a multimeter, because you need to check volts, and in one of these you need to check ohms. Let's go ahead, and since I mentioned it, the easiest thing, if you know what you're doing somewhat and you know your way around your voltmeter, I go and pull out this relay and interrogate it, and I'll explain how I do that. So first I grab my manual, and I know this fuse box is under the hood, and I know that the starter relay is going to be there. And it's I look on the list over here for the relays, and I see down here relay number 8, R8, says starter inhibit relay. That implies that it's there as a safety measure, but I'm not sure that's really true. But, so it says R8, and I go back and I look at the picture and I find R8 is there. So then I go to the box. Well, let's go ahead and show that I do have a good battery. So if I turn the ignition on, everything is on, everything's working. But when I try to start it, nothing happens. Let me try that again. I push the clutch in. Still, there's no click, there's no nothing. Okay, so that's the condition I'm concerned with here. I want to show you how to do something about that. So, get out the car. Oh, look, somebody already put a jack underneath the car. Let's find that relay in the box. Here's the box. Oh, look, somebody already took the relay out. It was right there. Remember, R8 was right there. And fortunately, there's a diagram on this relay, but there isn't always. So I just go through this one by one and tell you that, let's assume I don't have the diagram. There's 4 terminals, like I showed here. There's 4 wires coming in to the relay. The wires are underneath, so I can't actually see them. They're underneath the fuse box here. And so here's what I do. The first step is I'm going to look for this wire right here that comes from the battery to see if that fuse is okay and this wire is okay coming from the battery. That's going to be the only hot wire at this moment. So I'm gonna set my meter to volts. Here at volts DC. I'm gonna gotta hold a wire on negative somehow. There's negative right there. That's the negative side of the battery terminal. And then I'm going to stick my probe in here and watch my meter. So these are the terminals in the relay. And I'm going to just stick it in those one by one. So there's that one, nothing. That one, nothing. That one, nothing. That one, whoa. Okay, so I know that bottom terminal is coming from the fuse, and that one's good. Now, when I turn the ignition switch on and try to start the car all the way on, right to the start position, I should have another hot wire in the relay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have somebody inside the car, and they're going to try to start it. They're going to push the clutch in and try to start it, and I'm going to probe these again. And I still have, of course, the one hot one that was there before should still be hot, and it is, as long as I hold both of these on. The negative one isn't held on very well. And then I'm going to probe the other terminals, and I don't actually have a helper right now, but if I had one, I would also get, when they're trying to start it, I would get 12 volts again. I would get battery voltage on one of these terminals, one of the other terminals, but I don't get it on any of them, even if they were trying to push it down. Well, if they were trying to push it down, I happen to know because of this diagram that this wire would be hot, the second terminal up. So what I think is, because of this diagram, that the bottom terminal is the hot in, and the next terminal up is the start wire that comes out here and goes to the solenoid. That's what I think that is. So if I connect those two with, say, a jumper wire, like this one, here's a jumper wire I just made a little while ago. If I connect those two, the solenoid should click, and if the starter is good, oh, how about that? So I'm right. But I don't know, unless I'm getting a hot lead, a hot measurement off of that when someone's trying to start the car. I don't know if the ignition switch is good, and I don't know if that wire from the ignition switch is good. So if I didn't have that, if I didn't get hot when somebody was trying to start, and I was probing all of these other three terminals, and I couldn't get a hot out of any of those when someone's trying to start the car, then I know that either my ignition switch is bad or the wire from the ignition switch to this relay is bad. That is, this wire is the hot one, and oh, this is the wire that goes from the ignition switch, which I know has power because everything lit up when I turned it on. But this wire, this particular wire that goes here, when I turn it to start, could be bad. And that's the one that I was looking at, and I in fact jumped these two without bothering to do that, because that's what jumpers do. So those are the first two terminals. Now there's two more terminals that I haven't really found anything out about yet. As if everything's good so far, the next one I check is I'm going to look for this ground signal that comes from the park neutral switch. And so to check that, what I do is I change the setting on my meter to ohms. And right now it's showing infinite ohms, right? But if I get a negative connection, let's say the car's in park, and my book says as long as the car's in park, I should get a negative signal from this neutral safety switch. Well, I should get full continuity on one of these. That's not full continuity. That's how much is that? Times 10. That's 300. No, that's 30 ohms. Okay, that's not right. And that one is a lot more. That one's like 5,000 or 3,000 ohms. I don't know. Okay, yeah, no. It's half a kilo ohm. Sorry, 500 ohms. Too much. So I know what's wrong. I know why I'm not getting 0 ohms. It's because I'm not stepping on the clutch. But if I was, one of these two would be giving me 0 ohms, or close to 0 ohms. I'm not quite getting there, so, but I know that's because, so if I don't get 0 ohms on either one, I know there's something wrong. I mean, in my case, it's because I'm not stepping on the clutch, but in your case, it could be that the clutch switch is bad, or the park neutral switch is bad if you have an automatic transmission, or maybe you need to step on the brake switch too. Whatever your car's manual says you should do to start the car, you do all those things and you don't get 0 ohms here at the relay on one of these terminals, one of those two that's remaining that weren't the hot ones, right? Then you know something is wrong here. You know to go look at that, figure out, go get your diagram and figure out what's wrong with that neutral safety switch. And you can jump it or whatever to figure out. There's various things you can do, but I don't suppose to know what car you have, and I don't have the diagram for your car, so I can't troubleshoot that for you here, nor would I want to try. But so that's up to you. The last wire that I haven't checked is this start wire that runs from the relay. Well, I did check it actually, because when I jumped it, it worked. So I know it's good in this case because, well, there's actually nothing wrong with this car. I'm just using it as an example. But let's say when I jumped it, it didn't work, or I don't actually know if this wire is good or not. Then one of two things I can do. I can put one probe from my meter, my ohm meter, at this end of the wire, and another probe here in the relay socket, and if it goes 0, then I know this wire is good. And if I can't get it to go 0, then I know this wire is bad, basically. So that's one way to do it. And the other way is to go under the car, and there's a couple other steps you want to do from underneath the car. So I'm going to go ahead and put this relay back in because we're finished here. And I'm going to go under the car to show you the starter. The starter's in a different place on every car. I'm going to turn this back to volts. So I want to measure volts under the car. Why? Well, what I want to do is I want to have someone try to start the car, and I want to see, number one, well, actually, before I do that, before I go under the car, I should hold my finger on this relay, and now that I've plugged it back in, I should ask a helper to try to start the car, and I want to feel with my finger if this relay is clicking, because if I was getting both of those signals, if I was getting from the ignition switch a positive signal, and from the park neutral switch, if I was getting this positive here and this negative here, that relay should click, and when it clicks, it should connect those two right there. So, I mean, something's wrong, and it could be the relay. So I want that to click. If those other two are there, I want that to click. And if it doesn't click, then I'm going to replace the relay. And what I can do is I can temporarily borrow a similar one. If there's another one that has the same part number on it here, like this one I think is the same, I could swap these two depending on what this one is. I like to swap out the horn relay because I know I'm not going to need that while I'm troubleshooting. So I take the horn relay and put it there. If this one doesn't seem to work, then I try another one that's the same. And if that works, then I know I need to buy a new relay. Okay, that's all for that. Now let's go underneath and take the meter with us. Here's the meter. And I'm looking for the starter under here. Okay, so I know the starter is right here. This is the starter. I see it going into the transmission. This is the transmission over here. This is the engine over here. Here's the oil filter. And this is a cooling line that's actually cooling the oil right here in this little block. But I can see the starter up there, and the solenoid is there. It's kind of blocked a little by this hose. And in fact, I can't even see the front of it. We showed on the diagram that there were 3 wires. One that goes to the starter, and that's this one right here that I have my middle finger on. It goes from the solenoid to the starter. That gives the starter positive power when the solenoid clicks. And of course the starter already has negative power through the ground because it's bolted to the transmission, the engine and the transmission right here. Now there's a smaller wire. There's a smaller wire that's going right there. See, it's got a small, maybe a 10 millimeter or less, a smaller bolt on it. That is the start wire that comes from that relay, and that brings 12 volts battery voltage to the solenoid. And when that has power and the solenoid is grounded, it's grounded actually because it's connected here. You see the solenoid body is screwed in here. And you can see there's metal all the way across here. So everything is connected to ground, including the solenoid. So if I get 12 volts here, so what I'm going to do, what I would do, is I would bring my lead from my meter up in there, the red side. I hook the black side to ground, and I measure volts, and I touch this right on that, can you see it, right on that wire, on that nut, and I ask somebody to try to start the car. And if I read 12 volts, then I'm getting a start signal to the solenoid, and the solenoid should click. If it doesn't click, I'm going to replace the solenoid. If it does click, then I have to wonder, is it actually making the connection? Is power going through to the starter like it's supposed to if the solenoid is working right? I can find out by holding my, let me move this light again to where you can see that other wire, and I'm going to hold my probe on there. So now I'm probing the wire that goes to the starter through the solenoid. So if the solenoid is working properly, it clicks and it makes the connection, then I will get battery voltage on this wire that's going to the starter. And if I'm reading 12 volts there, and the starter's not turning, I'm assuming somebody's trying to start the car, right? So everything is turned on, the clutch is pushed in, and I've got 12 volts coming in on this other wire, the start wire, but it's not getting through to here. Then the solenoid's got to be bad, or possibly there's a corrosion in the wire, in that big wire that comes from the battery and goes to the solenoid. By the way, that wire is here. It's right here. But I can't see it because actually I could see it if I took this oil filter out. The oil filter is in my way. And if I needed to look at that wire and make sure it was connected okay, usually that's not something I need to worry about. And there may be another angle I can get to see it. But if I want to actually put my probe on that nut, it's way in front of the solenoid, and I just can't get to it with this oil filter in the way. So I would take that out if I needed to get to that third wire. And that's the hot lead, the big wire that comes from the battery. So those are the tests that you can do from underneath the car. There's another test that I often do, and if you go to my webpage, you'll see it there, where the big wire I just mentioned, the hot wire that comes from the battery, if I jump that across, if I jump that with a big wire across to that start nut right there, that's gonna make, that should make the solenoid click and the starter turn. Now, that's a very popular test that people will do just to see if there's power down here and the starter's okay. Those are some quick tests, but that's no way gonna test your interlock, your safety interlock, or your ignition switch, or any of that. All of those things are bypassed when you come down here and take power directly from the battery, that big battery cable, and jump it to the start terminal on the solenoid. When you do that test, you're only testing the solenoid and the battery. That's all you're testing in those cases. In fact, if you want to just test the starter, you can jump directly from that big cable to that braided starter wire over there. That one that I was testing, I was showing earlier, because that's the connection that the solenoid makes. It connects that big wire to this braided wire, and that goes directly to the starter. And if the starter turns when you do that, when you put power directly on it, then you know the starter's good. But the solenoid might still be bad. So you have to do all of these tests. To test each component, you're running different tests. But starting at when you start the job at that relay, you're getting a lot of information by just probing that relay. So that's all I have for now. Let me pause this.